Just sweetening your ride.
The thing about Halloween parties is that everyone thinks they're wearing a costume. But really, they're just showing you who they've always been underneath. Take my wife Alicia, for instance, standing there in her skin-tight black Catwoman suit, purring at some muscle-bound idiot in a loincloth who apparently thinks October in Massachusetts is the perfect time to show off his spray-tanned abs. I adjusted my pirate hat and took another swig of beer, watching the show from across the crowded living room. The party was at the Hendersons' place, one of those colonial houses that screamed, "We have money but no taste." Fake cobwebs draped every surface. Plastic skeletons dangled from the chandelier, and someone had thought it would be clever to serve vampire punch that tasted like Hawaiian punch mixed with cheap vodka. "Ahoy there, Captain Hook," came a voice behind me. I turned to see my buddy Richard dressed as a vampire, complete with plastic fangs that made him lisp. "You look like someone stole your treasure." "Just enjoying the entertainment," I said, nodding toward Alicia and her new friend. "Who's Tarzan over there?" Squinted through his fake vampire contacts. "That's Dominic something or other. Works construction, I think. New in town. Word is he's been making quite the impression on the ladies at the gym." At 42, I wasn't exactly competing with guys who looked like they bench-pressed small cars for fun. My own workout routine had devolved into lifting cases of beer at the restaurant I managed, Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar that served the best wings in town and attracted the kind of clientele who paid in crumpled 20s and left cigarette burns on the tables. "Your missus seems to be getting along well with the jungle man," Richard observed, not bothering to hide his amusement. I watched as Alicia threw her head back, laughing at something Dominic had whispered in her ear. Her hand rested on his bicep, fingers tracing the fake tribal tattoos someone had painted there for his costume. The sight made my stomach clench, but I kept my expression neutral. Greg Hunter didn't lose his cool at parties. Greg Hunter cracked jokes and bought the next round and pretended everything was fine. "She's just being friendly," I said, though the words tasted like ash in my mouth. "Right, friendly." Richard's fangs caught the light as he grinned, the same way a shark is friendly with a seal. Before I could respond, Alicia's best friend Susie appeared at my elbow. She'd gone with a witch costume. How fitting, complete with a pointed hat and a broomstick she'd been using to gesture dramatically all evening. Susie worked at the same law firm as Alicia, and the two of them had been inseparable since college. Where Alicia went, Susie followed, like some sort of legal-minded shadow. "Greg!" she exclaimed, her voice artificially bright. "Love the pirate look. Very authentic." There was something in her tone that set my teeth on edge. Susie had always been polite to me, but there was a sharpness underneath, like a knife wrapped in silk. She was one of those women who smiled when she delivered insults, making you wonder if you'd imagined the sting. "Thanks," I said. "Nice broomstick. Planning to fly home on it?" Her smile didn't waver. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. This party is just getting interesting." She glanced meaningfully toward Alicia and Dominic, who had moved closer together. His hand was now resting on the small of my wife's back, and she was leaning into him like a cat seeking warmth. The black leather of her costume gleamed under the party lights, and I couldn't help but remember how she'd looked when she'd tried it on at home earlier that evening. "You look incredible," I'd told her, meaning it. Even after 15 years of marriage, Alicia could still take my breath away. She had the kind of beauty that turned heads, long auburn hair, green eyes that sparkled when she laughed, and a smile that could sell ice to Eskimos. She'd barely glanced at me in the mirror. "It's just a costume, Greg." Just a costume. Right. The same way this was just a party, and Dominic was just being friendly, and the way my wife was looking at him was just innocent fun. I excused myself from Richard and Susie and made my way through the crowd toward the kitchen, needing some air and another beer. The kitchen was quieter, with only a few people refilling their drinks or sneaking bites of the elaborate spread the Hendersons had put together. I grabbed a beer from the ice-filled sink and was about to head back out when I heard familiar laughter from the back porch. Through the sliding glass door, I could see Alicia and Susie huddled together on the porch swing, their heads bent close in conversation. I couldn't make out the words, but their body language spoke volumes. The secretive giggles, the way they kept glancing back toward the house, the conspiratorial air that surrounded them like perfume. I stepped closer to the door, staying in the shadows of the kitchen. The porch was lit by string lights, shaped like tiny pumpkins, casting an orange glow over everything. Dominic had joined them now, settling onto the swing between my wife and her best friend like he belonged there. "Can't believe how easy this is," Susie was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the glass. "He has no idea what's coming." "Shh," Alicia giggled, but she didn't sound concerned. "Someone might hear you." "Let them," Dominic said, his voice a low rumble. "It's not like we're doing anything wrong. Yet." Disrig laughed at that, and the sound hit me like a physical blow. I stood there in the darkened kitchen, watching my wife of 15 years plot something with her best friend and a man she'd met less than 2 hours ago. The pirate hat suddenly felt ridiculous on my head, like I was a child playing dress-up while the adults made real plans. I backed away from the door and headed for the front of the house, my mind racing. Whatever they were planning, it involved me, and from the sound of it, I wasn't going to like it. The smart thing would be to confront Alicia directly, to demand an explanation and clear the air before things went any further. But Greg Hunter had never been accused of being the smartest guy in the room. Greg Hunter was the kind of guy who threw punches first and asked questions later, which was probably why he'd never made it past amateur boxing and was managing a dive bar instead of running a corporation like his wife's lawyer friends. The front yard was decorated with inflatable Halloween decorations. A giant spider, a skeleton climbing out of a fake grave, a witch that cackled when you walked past its motion sensor. I made my way to Dominic's car, a cherry-red Camaro that screamed midlife crisis, louder than a fire alarm. The kind of car that guys like him drove to compensate for whatever they were lacking in other departments. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight to examine the car. It was pristine, probably detailed every week, with custom rims that probably cost more than I made in a month. The vanity plate read DOM1N8R, because of course it did. The gas tank was on the driver's side, and the cap was one of those fancy locking ones. But the lock was just for show, a sharp twist and it came right off. I pulled out the small bag of sugar packets I'd grabbed from the kitchen and emptied them one by one into the tank. It was an old trick, probably wouldn't do any permanent damage, but it would sure as heck ruin his night. Having car trouble? I spun around to find Dominic standing behind me, his arms crossed over his bare chest. Up close, he was even more ridiculous. The loincloth was made of fake fur, and someone had painted his entire torso with temporary tattoos that were already starting to smudge from sweat and whatever my wife had been doing with her hands. "Just admiring the ride," I said, casually pocketing the empty sugar packets. "Nice car." "Thanks." His eyes narrowed as he looked from me to his gas tank and back again. "You know, it's funny. I was just talking to your wife about you. All good things, I hope." "Oh yeah, she had some very interesting stories." He stepped closer and I caught a whiff of cheap cologne mixed with beer and something else, the scent of my wife's perfume. "She mentioned you used to box. Amateur circuit, right?" "That's right. I did some mixed martial arts back in the day. Different discipline, but same basic principle." He flexed his shoulders, making the fake tattoos ripple. "Maybe we should spar sometime. You know, friendly competition." There was nothing friendly about the way he said it. This was a challenge, pure and simple. The new bull testing the old one, seeing if he still had any fight left in him. "Maybe we should," I said, matching his tone. "Though I should warn you, I fight dirty." He was no humor in it. I wouldn't expect anything else from someone like you. Just man like me, a washed-up boxer who managed a dive bar and drove a 10-year-old pickup truck. Someone who wore costume store pirate outfits, while real men like him walked around shirtless and stole other men's wives. "Well," I said, stepping back from his car, "I should probably get back to the party. Wouldn't want to miss anything important." "No," he agreed, his smile sharp as a blade. "You really wouldn't." I walked back toward the house, feeling his eyes on my back the entire way. Through the front windows, I could see the party was still in full swing. People dancing, drinking, laughing. Normal people having a normal Halloween party, blissfully unaware that my world was quietly falling apart in their midst. I found Richard by the punch bowl, his vampire fangs now hanging around his neck like a bizarre necklace. "There you are," he said. "I was beginning to think you'd been eaten by a real pirate." "Just getting some air." I grabbed another beer, my third or fourth of the night. "Listen, Rich, can I ask you something?" "Shoot. If you knew someone was planning something behind your back, something that would hurt you, would you want to know about it?" Richard studied my face for a long moment. "This is about Alicia, isn't it?" I didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Greg," he said quietly, "I've been your friend for 20 years. You know I'd tell you if I thought something was really wrong." "You? Of course I would. But sometimes," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "sometimes we see things that aren't there because we're looking for them. You know what I mean?" I knew what he meant. He meant I was being paranoid. He meant I was seeing threats where none existed, reading too much into innocent interactions. He meant I was turning into one of those pathetic husbands who accused their wives of cheating every time they smiled at another man. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was overreacting to a little harmless flirting at a party. Maybe the conversation I'd overheard on the porch was about something else entirely. A surprise party, or a work project, or any one of a dozen innocent explanations. But then I saw Alicia walk back into the house, her lipstick smudged and her hair slightly mussed, followed a few seconds later by Dominic, with that same predatory smile on his face. And I knew that whatever was happening here, it was anything but innocent. The party wound down around midnight, with people gradually filtering out into the cool October night. I helped clean up, making small talk with the other guests and pretending everything was normal. Alicia stayed close to Susie, the two of them whispering and giggling like teenagers with a secret. When we finally got home, she went straight upstairs without a word, leaving me alone in our living room with the taste of beer and betrayal in my mouth. I sat in my recliner, the one she always complained about but that I'd refused to replace, and stared at the family photos on the mantelpiece. 15 years of marriage, captured in silver frames. Our wedding day, vacations, holidays, birthdays, all of it feeling suddenly fragile, like a house of cards, waiting for the slightest breeze to bring it tumbling down. Upstairs, I could hear the shower running. Alicia always showered after parties, claiming she needed to wash off the smell of cigarettes and cheap perfume. Tonight, I wondered what else she might be washing away. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos from the evening. There weren't many. I'd been too distracted to play photographer. But there were a few group shots that other people had taken and shared. In one of them, I could see Alicia and Dominic in the background, standing closer together than married women should stand with strange men. In another, Susie was whispering something in Alicia's ear, while they both looked in my direction. The shower stopped running, and a few minutes later, Alicia appeared at the top of the stairs in her robe, her hair wrapped in a towel. "Are you coming to bed?" she asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "In a minute," I said, just thinking about the party. It was fun, wasn't it? The Hendersons really outdid themselves this year. Yeah, fun. I looked up at her, this woman I'd loved for more than half my adult life. "You seem to enjoy yourself." Something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or annoyance. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just that you look like you were having a good time." "I was. Is that a problem?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. This was my chance to say something, to bring up what I'd seen and heard, to clear the air before whatever was happening went any further. Instead, I just shook my head. No problem at all. String studied me for another moment, then turned and disappeared into our bedroom. A few minutes later, I heard the familiar sound of her settling into bed, followed by the soft rhythm of her breathing as she fell asleep. I stayed in my chair until dawn, staring at those family photos, and wondering how long it had been since they'd stopped being real and started being just for show. Outside, Halloween was officially over, and the real monsters were putting away their masks. But some of us, I was beginning to realize, had been wearing masks all along. The thing about small towns is that everybody knows everybody else's business, usually before you know it yourself. Murphy's Tavern was the unofficial headquarters for local gossip. And, as the manager, I had a front row seat to all the drama. Usually, I found it entertaining. Today, 3 days after the Halloween party, I was discovering what it felt like to be the main attraction. "Hey, Greg," called out Tommy Brennan from his usual spot at the end of the bar. Tommy was a plumber who'd been coming in every Tuesday for the past 5 years. Always ordered the same thing: Bud Light and buffalo wings. Extra blue cheese. "Heard your wife made quite the impression at the Henderson party." I kept my eyes on the glass I was polishing, though it was already spotless. "Yeah? How's that?" "Oh, just that she seemed real friendly with that new guy. What's his name? Dominic?" The glass creaked in my grip. "People talk too much in this town." "Ain't that the truth?" agreed Martha Kowalski, a retired schoolteacher who came in for the senior lunch special every Tuesday and Thursday. She was nursing her usual white wine and pretending to read a paperback romance novel. But I knew she was listening to every word. "Though, I have to say, Greg, your Alicia looked absolutely stunning in that costume. Like something out of a movie." "She's always been beautiful," I said, which was true. What I didn't add was that lately, that beauty felt like something she was saving for other people. The lunch crowd was typical for a Tuesday. A handful of regulars, a few construction workers grabbing quick meals between jobs, and a table of elderly women who came in for the early bird special and stayed for 2 hours gossiping about their neighbors. The kind of people who'd known me since I was a kid getting into fights behind the high school, who remembered when I thought I was going to be the next Rocky Balboa, instead of a guy who served drinks to people with bigger dreams than mine. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see Richard walking in, still wearing his work clothes from the insurance office. He slid onto a bar stool and ordered his usual: whiskey sour, no cherry. "Rough day?" I asked, though I could see the answer in his face. "You could say that." Had to tell the Petersons that their claim was denied. Apparently, act of stupidity isn't covered under their homeowner's policy. What'd they do? Tried to deep fry a turkey in their garage. In October, while it was raining. He shook his head and took a sip of his drink. Some people have more money than sense. We made small talk for a few minutes, but I could tell he had something on his mind. Richard had known me long enough to read my moods, and I'd known him long enough to read his. Finally, during a lull in the conversation, he leaned closer. "Greg, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" "I was at the bank this morning, making a deposit. Saw Alicia there with that Dominic guy. They were sitting in one of those private consultation rooms with Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison wasn't the dead rock star. He was the bank's loan officer, a thin, nervous man who'd graduated high school a year behind me and still acted like he was afraid I was going to stuff him in a locker. "So?" I said, though my mouth had gone dry. "So, they were there for over an hour, Greg. And when they came out, Alicia was carrying a folder full of paperwork." I set down the glass I'd been holding, afraid I might break it. Maybe she was helping him with something. You know how she is about legal stuff. Richard's expression was pained. "Greg." "What?" "Jim Cousin. We had lunch afterward, and he was all excited about this big loan he'd just approved. Said some guy was buying a house, and his business partner was co-signing." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Business partner. Not girlfriend, not friend, not even acquaintance. Business partner. "That doesn't mean anything," I said, but the words sounded hollow even to me. "Doesn't it?" Richard finished his drink and signaled for another. "Greg, I've been your friend for 20 years. I've never seen you like this." "Like what?" "Like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like you're expecting the worst to happen." Maybe because I was. Maybe because every instinct I had was screaming that something was wrong, that the woman I'd been married to for 15 years was slipping away from me, and there wasn't a single thing I could do about it. The afternoon passed in a blur of routine tasks: restocking the bar, taking inventory, dealing with a backed-up toilet in the men's room that required more plumbing knowledge than I possessed. Normal problems that I could actually solve, unlike the mess my personal life was becoming. Around 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Alicia. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." working late, at the law firm where she was a clerk, not a lawyer, where she filed papers and answered phones and occasionally helped with research, but definitely didn't work the kind of hours that kept her out past midnight. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I could text back, ask her what case was so important that it couldn't wait until tomorrow. I could call her office and see if she actually answered. I could drive over there and see if her car was in the parking lot. Instead, I typed back, "Okay, see you tomorrow," because that's what Greg Hunter did. He took things at face value, trusted the people he loved, and tried not to rock the boat, even when the boat was already taking on water. The dinner crowd was busier than usual, which helped keep my mind off things. A group of college kids celebrating someone's 21st birthday, a young couple on what looked like a first date, a table of middle-aged women who'd clearly started their evening at another bar and were well on their way to making some questionable decisions. Around 8 o'clock, Susie walked in. She never came to Murphy's. In all the years I'd known her, I could count on one hand the number of times she'd set foot in the place. She was more of a wine bar person, the kind of establishment that served artisanal cheese plates and had names like The Grape Escape or Vino Veritas. She slid onto a bar stool and ordered a Cosmopolitan, which we definitely didn't make well, but I gave it my best shot. She was dressed for the office. Navy blue suit, sensible heels, her blonde hair pulled back in a bun that was starting to come loose. "This is a surprise," I said, sliding the drink across the bar. "What brings you to my humble establishment?" "Can't a girl grab a drink after a long day at work?" she asked, but there was something forced about her casual tone. "Of course, though I have to say, this doesn't seem like your usual scene." She looked around the bar, taking in the neon beer signs, the peanut shells on the floor, the jukebox that had been playing the same songs since 1987. "You're right, it's not. But sometimes it's good to try new things, don't you think?" There was something in the way she said it that set off alarm bells in my head. Susie didn't do anything without a reason, and she certainly didn't venture into dive bars just for the experience. "How's Alicia?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "She's good. Busy, but good. This new case she's working on is really demanding." "What kind of case?" Simmons Handy's hand tightened on her glass. "Oh, legal stuff. Very complicated." "Right. Legal stuff. So complicated that a law clerk had to work until midnight, and so confidential that she couldn't even tell her husband what it was about." "She mentioned she might be working late tonight," I said. "Did she? Well, yes, I suppose she might be. Like I said, it's a demanding case." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the conversation dying a natural death. Around us, the bar hummed with its usual Tuesday night energy. Nothing too wild, just people unwinding after another day of ordinary disappointments. "Greg," Susie said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you ever think about what you'd do if your life suddenly changed? Like, dramatically changed?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if everything you thought you knew turned out to be wrong? What if the people you trusted most were different than you thought they were?" I studied her face, looking for clues about where this was going. "I guess I'd deal with it. Adapt. Move on." "Would you? Or would you fight to keep things the way they were?" "Depends on whether the way things were was worth fighting for." She nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something she'd been thinking. "That's very philosophical of you." "I'm a deep guy." Relinquit that got a small smile out of her. "Yes, you are. Deeper than most people give you credit for." She finished her drink and left a 20 on the bar, which was about double what she owed. "Thanks for the drink, Greg. And the conversation. Anytime." She was almost to the door when she turned back. "Greg, whatever happens, just remember that sometimes the people who hurt us think they're doing us a favor. They think we're better off not knowing the truth." And then she was gone, leaving me with more questions than answers, and the growing certainty that my world was about to come crashing down around me. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I served drinks, made small talk, and tried to act normal while my mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. By closing time, I'd convinced myself that I was overreacting, that I was seeing conspiracies where none existed. But when I got home at nearly midnight and found Alicia's car already in the driveway, that theory went out the window. She was in bed, apparently asleep, but her hair was still damp from a recent shower, and I could smell unfamiliar cologne on the pillowcase. I stood in our bedroom doorway for a long time, watching her breathe in the darkness and wondering when she'd become a stranger to me. When had we stopped talking about our days, our dreams, our fears? When had we started living parallel lives that only intersected at bedtime and breakfast? The answer, I was beginning to realize, was probably months ago, maybe longer. I'd just been too busy, too trusting, or too stupid to notice. I slept on the couch that night, telling myself it was because I didn't want to wake her. But the truth was simpler and more painful. I couldn't bear to lie next to her, knowing that wherever she'd been that evening, it hadn't been working late at the office. Friday night at Murphy's was always unpredictable. You'd get the usual crowd of regulars mixed with weekend warriors looking to blow off steam, plus the occasional group of college kids who'd heard we had the cheapest drinks in town. Tonight was shaping up to be busier than usual, which was both good and bad. Good for business, bad for my ability to think about anything other than the slow-motion train wreck my marriage had become. I was pulling a beer for Jake Morrison, Jim, the loan officer's older brother, who worked construction and came in every Friday like clockwork, when I saw them walk in together. Alicia and Dominic. They didn't see me at first, too busy laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear as they found a table in the corner. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Black, form-fitting. The kind of thing that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. He was in jeans and a tight t-shirt that showed off his gym-sculpted physique, looking like he'd stepped out of a fitness magazine. My hand tightened on the beer tap handle, and foam overflowed from Jake's glass onto the bar. "Easy there, Greg," Jake said, grabbing some napkins to clean up the mess. "You trying to drown me?" "Sorry." Distracted, Jake followed my gaze to the corner table and let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be darned. That's your wife, isn't it?" "Yeah. Unless... And that's the guy everyone's been talking about. Dominic something." "Yeah." Jake took a sip of his beer, seemingly oblivious to the fact that my world was imploding right in front of him. "They make a good-looking couple." I wanted to punch him. Instead, I grabbed a bar towel and started wiping down glasses that were already clean, trying to keep my hands busy while my mind raced. What were they doing here? Alicia never came to Murphy's unless it was for some special occasion, and she'd certainly never brought another man here. It was like she was flaunting it, daring me to do something about it. "Greg?" Jake was looking at me with concern. "You okay, buddy? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." But I wasn't fine. I was the opposite of fine. I was watching my wife of 15 years openly date another man in my own bar, in front of people who'd known us since we were kids. The humiliation was like acid in my veins, burning through whatever dignity I had left. I forced myself to focus on work, taking orders and mixing drinks while keeping one eye on the corner table. They were deep in conversation, their heads bent close together like lovers sharing secrets. Every few minutes one of them would laugh, and the sound would cut through me like a knife. Around 9 o'clock, Richard showed up with his girlfriend, Susan, a kindergarten teacher who laughed too loud and always ordered drinks with umbrellas in them. They grabbed a table near the bar, and I could see Richard's face when he spotted Alicia and Dominic. "Jesus Christ," he muttered when I brought over their drinks. "Is she out of her mind?" "Apparently," I said. Susan followed his gaze and gasped. "Oh my God, Greg, I'm so sorry. This is just... who does something like this?" "Slashing who doesn't give a rip about her husband's feelings," Richard said, his voice tight with anger. "I can't believe she'd be so blatant about it." Neither could I. But there she was, my beautiful wife, acting like she was single and available while her husband served drinks 20 feet away. It was beyond disrespectful. It was cruel. The evening dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. I watched other customers notice the situation, saw the whispered conversations and pointed looks. By tomorrow, everyone in town would know that Greg Hunter's wife was cheating on him, and that he'd been too much of a coward to do anything about it. Around 10:30, things got worse. Susie walked in. She spotted Alicia and Dominic immediately and made a beeline for their table, sliding into the booth next to my wife like she belonged there. The three of them huddled together, talking in low voices and occasionally glancing in my direction. Whatever they were discussing, it was about me. I could tell by the way they looked at me, then quickly looked away when they realized I was watching. "This is unbelievable," Richard said, appearing at the bar with his empty glass. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore." "Hide what?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "Come on, Greg, look at them. They're planning something, and it's not a surprise party." He was right. There was something calculating about the way they were talking, something that went beyond a simple affair. This felt bigger, more deliberate, like they were working together towards some specific goal. "Maybe I should go over there," I said, confront them directly. "And say what?" "Excuse me, honey, but are you planning to destroy my life?" Richard shook his head. "You need to be smart about this. Document everything. Get a lawyer. Protect yourself." "Protect myself." The phrase echoed in my head as I watched my wife laugh at something Dominic had said, her hand resting on his arm like it belonged there. When had I become someone who needed protection from the person I loved most in the world? The answer came to me with crystalline clarity. The moment she'd decided I was expendable. At 11 o'clock, they got up to leave. Alicia walked past the bar without looking at me, but I could smell her perfume. The expensive stuff she only wore for special occasions. Dominic followed behind her, and as he passed my station, he turned and looked directly at me. "Great place you got here," he said, his voice carrying just enough volume for the nearby customers to hear. Real. Authentic. That way he said it made it sound like an insult. Like Murphy's was some kind of dive that only losers would frequent, and by extension, I was a loser for running it. "Thanks," I managed. "Come back any time." His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Oh, I will. I definitely will." They left together, Alicia's hand in his as they walked out into the cool October night. I stood behind my bar, surrounded by the familiar sounds of conversation and clinking glasses, and felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. "You okay, boss?" asked Jenny, my part-time bartender who'd come in to help with the Friday night crowd. She was 23, fresh out of college, with pink streaks in her hair and enough energy to power a small city. "Yeah, I'm fine." "No, you're not. You look like someone just ran over your dog." She glanced toward the door where Alicia and Dominic had exited. "That was your wife, wasn't it?" "Yeah. And that guy wasn't you." "Nope." Jenny shook her head in disgust. "What a witch. Sorry, I know she's your wife, but seriously, who does that?" Out dismissing of the mouths of babes. A 23-year-old kid with pink hair had more sense than I did. She could see what was happening, call it what it was, while I was still trying to find innocent explanations for the inexplicable. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Last call came and went, the customers filtered out, and eventually it was just me and Jenny cleaning up. She chattered about her classes and her boyfriend and her plans for the weekend. Normal problems of normal people living normal lives. "You want some advice?" she asked as we were closing up. "Sure. My mom always said that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them. Don't make excuses for them. Don't try to explain it away. Just believe what you see." Combating. Smart woman, Jenny's mom. I drove home through empty streets, past houses where normal families were sleeping peacefully in their beds. The porch light was on at my house, but Alicia's car wasn't in the driveway. Working late again, probably. Or maybe she'd given up the pretense entirely. I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at the house we'd bought together 7 years ago. We'd been so excited about it. Our first real home, with a yard and a 2-car garage and enough space to start a family. We'd talked about kids back then, about Christmas mornings and birthday parties and all the ordinary magic that came with building a life together. Now it just looked like a building. 4 walls and a roof. Shelter from the weather, but not from the storm that was coming. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, I hoped it might be from Alicia. An apology, an explanation, something to make sense of what was happening. Instead, it was from a number I didn't recognize. "She's not coming home tonight. Thought you should know. A friend." I stared at the message until the screen went dark, then read it again when I touched it back to life. Someone was watching. Someone who knew what was going on and felt sorry enough for me to send an anonymous heads up. The thought should have been comforting, but instead it just made the humiliation worse. I was the last to know about my own life. I went inside and poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey. The good stuff, not the rail liquor we served at the bar. If I was going to drink myself to sleep, I might as well do it right. The house felt different without Alicia in it. Bigger somehow, but also emptier. I wandered through the rooms we decorated together, looking at the photos and furniture and accumulated debris of 15 years of marriage. When had it all become just stuff? When had our home become just a place where we happened to sleep? The whiskey didn't help. If anything, it made everything sharper, more painful. I found myself standing in our bedroom, staring at Alicia's side of the closet. Half her clothes were missing, not all of them, but enough to suggest she'd been planning this for a while. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a sudden affair, a moment of weakness that had spiraled out of control. This was calculated, deliberate. She'd been moving her things out gradually, probably for weeks, while I'd been too oblivious to notice. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our recent text messages. They were all business: grocery lists, schedule updates, brief exchanges about household logistics. When had we stopped saying, "I love you"? When had we stopped having real conversations? The answer was probably months ago, maybe longer. We'd been living like roommates, polite strangers, sharing space and expenses, but not much else. I'd been so focused on work, on keeping the bar afloat and paying the bills, that I'd missed the signs that my marriage was dying. Or maybe I'd seen them and chosen to ignore them, because the truth was too painful to face. My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. The caller ID showed Richard's name. "Hey," I answered. "Greg, thank God. I've been trying to call you for an hour. Sorry, I was thinking. Listen, I just got off the phone with my cousin Jim. You know, from the bank? Yeah. He told me something you need to know. That loan he approved for Dominic, the one Alicia co-signed? What about it? It wasn't for a house, Greg. It was for a business loan. A restaurant." The words hit me like ice water. What kind of restaurant? The kind that competes directly with Murphy's. Same neighborhood, same target demographic. They're planning to put you out of business. I holding on the bed, the phone pressed to my ear like a lifeline. "Are you sure?" Jim showed me the paperwork. They're calling it the new Murphy's. Bigger space, full kitchen, live music on weekends. Everything your place has, but newer and shinier. Rainfall London spun around me. It wasn't just an affair, it was a hostile takeover. They weren't just stealing my wife. They were stealing my livelihood, my identity, everything I'd worked for. "Greg, you still there?" "Yeah," I whispered. "I'm here. I'm coming over." "No, don't. I need to think." "Shall I come?" Nodded. "I'm fine, Rich, really. I just need some time to process this." Hung up before he could argue, and sat in the silence of my empty house, trying to wrap my head around the magnitude of what was happening. My wife wasn't just leaving me for another man. She was systematically destroying everything I cared about. The bar, my reputation, my financial security, all of it. The question was, what was I going to do about it? For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than hurt and confusion. I felt anger. Pure, clean, righteous anger that burned through the whiskey fog and sharpened my focus to a razor's edge. Greg Hunter might be a lot of things. A failed boxer, a small-town bartender, a man whose wife was cheating on him in front of the whole town. But he wasn't a victim. Not anymore. It was time to fight back. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you a tremendous advantage when you finally decide to show people what you're really capable of. For weeks, I'd been playing the role of the oblivious husband, the pathetic loser who didn't know his wife was screwing around behind his back. But the truth was, I'd been watching, learning, and most importantly, planning. Monday morning found me at the offices of Steinberg, Walsh & Associates, the best law firm in town that wasn't the one where Alicia worked. I'd called ahead and made an appointment with Patricia Walsh herself, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had a reputation for eating opposing counsel for breakfast. "Mr. Hunter," she said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from her imposing desk. "I understand you're interested in discussing a divorce." Shattered, "Among other things," I said, sliding a thick folder across the desk. "I think you'll find this interesting reading." She opened the folder and began scanning the contents. Bank statements, loan documents, photographs, printed text messages, and a detailed timeline I'd spent the weekend putting together. Her eyebrows rose higher with each page. "This is quite thorough," she said finally. "How did you obtain some of these documents?" "My wife and I have joint accounts. The bank statements are all legitimate. The photos were taken in public places. The text messages..." I shrugged. "Let's just say Alicia isn't as careful with her phone as she should be." That was an understatement. Saturday night, while she was working late again, I'd used the spare key to her office and found her phone charging at her desk. 15 minutes with a USB cable and some software I'd downloaded had given me access to months of deleted messages between her, Dominic, and Susie. The things I'd read had been illuminating, to say the least. Patricia continued reading, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "This business loan is particularly interesting. Your wife co-signed for a substantial amount, using your joint assets as collateral, without my knowledge or consent, which, given that you're married, constitutes fraud." She looked up at me with something that might have been respect. "Mr. Hunter, I have to ask, what is it you want from this situation?" "I want my life back. I want them to understand that actions have consequences, and I want to make sure they can never do this to anyone else." She smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "I think we can work together." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Patricia's firm moved with impressive speed, filing injunctions to freeze the business loan, demanding forensic accounting of our joint assets, and preparing divorce papers that would leave Alicia with exactly what she'd brought into the marriage 15 years ago. Which wasn't much. But that was just the legal strategy. I had other plans. Wednesday evening, I was working the dinner shift at Murphy's when Dominic walked in alone. He swaggered up to the bar like he owned the place, which, given his plans, he probably thought he soon would. "Evening, Greg," he said, settling onto a bar stool. "Busy night?" "Busy enough," I continued wiping down glasses, not looking at him directly. "What can I get you?" "How about a beer? Whatever you've got on tap." I poured him a Budweiser and set it in front of him. "That'll be $4.50. He pulled out a 20 and laid it on the bar. "Keep the change." Self-tipper, I'd give him that. Though it was easy to be generous with money you'd borrowed using someone else's assets as collateral. "So," he said, taking a sip of his beer, "I hear you've been having some legal troubles." Thanks, word traveled fast in a small town, especially when it involved frozen bank accounts and emergency court hearings. "Nothing I can't handle." "He's good to hear. I'd hate to think you were in over your head." The condescension in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. This was a man who thought he'd already won, who believed that Greg Hunter was too stupid and too weak to fight back effectively. He was about to learn otherwise. "Actually," I said, leaning against the bar, "I've been meaning to thank you." That caught him off guard. "Thank me?" "For opening my eyes." "Sure, like I thought, I've Goddard light and family for one of this king." That caught him off guard. "For opening my eyes." See, I was starting to think my marriage was in trouble, but I couldn't figure out why. Turns out it wasn't anything I did wrong. It was just that my wife is a lying, cheating hoe who is planning to destroy my business and steal my money. His face darkened. Watch your mouth. Or what? You'll beat me up? In my own bar, in front of all these witnesses? I gestured to the other customers, most of whom were now openly listening to our conversation. That would be assault, Dominic. And given that you're on probation, assault would send you right back to prison. The color drained from his face. How did you know about your record? Please. This is a small town. Everyone knows everything eventually. I pulled out my phone and showed him a screenshot of his arrest record, which was publicly available online if you knew where to look. Aggravated assault, wasn't it? Beat up your ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend. Spent 18 months in county, got out 6 months ago. Sluggish across the bar, but I was ready for him. I stepped back just out of reach, and he sprawled across the wooden surface, knocking over his beer and several other glasses. Jesus! Shouted Tommy Brennan from his usual spot. Call the cops! No need, I said calmly, pulling out my phone again. I'm recording everything. Dominic here just violated his probation by attempting to assault me in front of a dozen witnesses. Trembling scrambled to his feet, his face red with rage and embarrassment. Beer dripped from his shirt, and broken glass crunched under his feet. You son of a witch, he snarled. Now, I said. Language. There are ladies present. He looked around the bar, suddenly aware that everyone was staring at him. These were people who'd known me for years, who'd watched me grow up in this town. They might gossip about my personal problems, but when push came to shove, they were on my side. This isn't over, he said, backing toward the door. Oh, but it is, I replied. Check your phone. You should have a message from your parole officer by now. Pulled out his phone, and I watched his face go white as he read the text. I'd sent the video of his attempted assault to the county probation office before he'd even gotten back on his feet. You're finished in this town, he said, but there was desperation in his voice now. No, I said, you are. He left without another word, and the bar erupted in applause. Tommy Brennan raised his glass in a toast, and several other customers followed suit. About time someone put that a-hole in his place, Martha Kowalski declared, and coming from a retired schoolteacher, that was quite a statement. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Thursday morning, I paid a visit to the law firm where Alicia and Susie worked. The receptionist, a young woman named Kelly who'd graduated high school with my nephew, looked nervous when I walked in. Hi, Mr. Hunter, she said. Are you here to see Alicia? Actually, I'm here to see Mr. Patterson, I said, referring to the senior partner. I have some information he might find interesting about his employees. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Patterson's office, watching him read through copies of the text messages I'd recovered from Alicia's phone. His face grew darker with each page. This is quite disturbing, he said finally. If these messages are authentic, then it appears that Miss Hunter and Ms. Reynolds have been using firm resources to conduct personal business. Worse, they've been discussing confidential client information in their personal communications. That was the key detail I'd been hoping he'd notice. In their planning messages, Alicia and Susie had referenced information from divorce cases they'd worked on, using other people's settlements as templates for their own scheme. It was a massive ethics violation that could get them both disbarred. What do you intend to do with this information? Patterson asked. That depends, I said. I'm not interested in destroying innocent people's lives, but I also can't allow this kind of behavior to continue. He nodded slowly. I understand. Give me 24 hours to conduct an internal investigation. I think you'll find that the situation resolves itself appropriately. The law firm feeling lighter than I had in weeks. 2 down, 1 to go. Friday evening, I was closing up Murphy's when Alicia finally showed up. She looked terrible. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup was smudged, and there were dark circles under her eyes. The stress of the past few days had clearly taken its toll. We need to talk, she said, sliding onto a bar stool. Do we? I continued cleaning glasses, not looking at her directly. Greg, please. This has gone far enough. Has it? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like it's just getting started. She pulled out an envelope and placed it on the bar. These are the divorce papers. I'll sign them tonight if you agree to drop the fraud charges and the ethics complaint. Melting the envelope in the envelope and scanned the documents. They were remarkably generous. She was asking for almost nothing, just enough to start over somewhere else. What about Dominic? I asked. He's gone. Left town yesterday after his parole officer called him in. Turns out someone sent them a video of him trying to attack you. Imagine that. Eumeros and Susie? Fired. Patterson gave her an hour to clean out her desk. Alicia's voice was barely above a whisper. Greg, I know you hate me right now, and you have every right to. But please, just let this end here. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. And we can both try to move on. I looked at this woman I'd loved for 15 years. This stranger who'd systematically planned to destroy everything I cared about. The smart thing would be to take the deal, sign the papers, and let her disappear into whatever new life she'd planned for herself. But I wasn't feeling particularly smart. No, I said. What? I said no. See, Alicia, the problem with your plan is that it was based on the assumption that I'm stupid, that I wouldn't figure out what you were doing, or that if I did, I'd be too weak to fight back. I set down the glass I'd been cleaning and looked directly at her for the first time since she'd walked in. But I'm not stupid, and I'm not weak. I'm just patient. Do you know what I've been doing for the past week, besides destroying your boyfriend's life and getting your best friend fired? I pulled out a thick folder from under the bar. I've been investigating. Did you know that Susie has been skimming money from the firm's client account? Or that she's been selling confidential information to private investigators? Like his face went white. Oh, you didn't know about that part? Yeah, turns out your best friend has been running her own little side business, and she used information from your affair to blackmail 3 other couples in town. The FBI is very interested in talking to her. That's impossible, is it? How do you think she afforded that new car or the down payment on her condo? I opened the folder and showed her bank statements, email printouts, and photographs. She's been playing you, Alicia. The whole thing was her idea from the beginning. She found Dominic. She introduced you to him. And she helped plan the whole scheme. You weren't her partner. You were her mark. Truth hit her like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her face crumpling as the full scope of her betrayal became clear. But why? She whispered. Because 15 years ago, I reported her for stealing from her previous employer. She lost her job, her reputation, everything. And she's been planning her revenge ever since. Alicia sank onto the bar stool, her head in her hands. Oh God, what have I done? You chose to trust the wrong person. You chose to betray your husband. You chose to throw away 15 years of marriage for a man you'd known for 2 weeks, and a woman who was using you. I walked around the bar and stood in front of her. But most importantly, you chose to underestimate me. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Greg, please. I know I can't undo what I've done, but... You're right, you can't. I handed her the divorce papers. Sign them, tonight, and then get out of my town. She signed the papers with shaking hands, her tears falling onto the legal documents that would officially end our marriage. When she was finished, she looked up at me one last time. For what it's worth, she said, I did love you. Once. I know, I replied. That's what makes this so much worse. She left without another word, walking out into the October night and out of my life forever. I watched through the window as she got into her car and drove away, taking with her the last remnants of the man I used to be. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed for the first time in weeks. Alone, but not lonely. The house felt different. Smaller, maybe, but also cleaner. Like a weight had been lifted from the walls themselves. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, reading the morning paper and enjoying the silence. On page 3, there was a small article about a local woman who'd been arrested for embezzlement and fraud. The mugshot showed Susie looking haggard and defeated, nothing like the confident woman who'd walked into my bar a week ago. My phone rang. It was Richard. Jesus Christ, Greg, he said without preamble. Did you see the news? About Susie? Yeah, I saw it. How did you know she was stealing money? He didn't at first, but when I started digging into her finances, things didn't add up. She was living way beyond her means for a law clerk's salary. So I did some more digging. And found what? Bank records, email trails, testimony from 3 couples she'd been blackmailing. Turns out she's been running cons for years. The affair with Alicia was just her latest scheme. Richard was quiet for a long moment. So, what happens now? Incarcerated. I looked around my kitchen, at the coffee mug Alicia had bought me for my birthday 3 years ago, at the refrigerator, covered with photos of a life that no longer existed. Now, I start over, I said. Clean slate. You okay with that? Was I okay? My marriage was over. My trust had been shattered, and I'd learned that the people I loved most were capable of betraying me in ways I'd never imagined. By any reasonable measure, I should be devastated. But I wasn't. I was free. Yeah, I said. I think I am. That afternoon, I drove to Murphy's to open for the weekend crowd. As I unlocked the front door, I noticed a "For Sale" sign in the window of the building across the street, the space where Dominic and Alicia had planned to open their competing restaurant. The dream of the new Murphy's had died, along with everything else. Inside, I found a bottle of champagne behind the bar, the good stuff I'd been saving for a special occasion. I popped it open and poured myself a glass, raising it in a toast to the empty room. To new beginnings, I said aloud. The champagne was excellent. At 6 o'clock, I opened the doors to the usual Friday night crowd. Tommy Brennan was first through the door, as always, followed by Martha Kowalski and a dozen other regulars who'd been coming here for years. They greeted me like nothing had changed, like I was still the same Greg Hunter who'd been serving them drinks and listening to their problems for the past decade. Maybe I was, or maybe I was someone entirely new. Either way, I was exactly where I belonged. "What's the special tonight, Greg?" asked Jenny, tying on her apron as she prepared for another busy shift. I looked around the bar, my bar, at the familiar faces and comfortable chaos that had been my life's work. Outside, October was giving way to November, and the first snow of the season was starting to fall. "Tonight," I said, "everything's on the house." Shimmer that went up for my customers was loud enough to shake the rafters. I smiled and got back to work, pouring drinks and taking orders, and living my life exactly the way I wanted to live it. Free,